Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
hmm
Today, we're going to be looking at Rodney Alcala.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is, the dating game killer, right?
Right, right.
But I think, as we'll see today, that name really just barely scratches the surface of this case.
Yeah, definitely.
We've got some excerpts from a really, really detailed document all about Alcala's life and crimes. And I got to say, some of this stuff is really hard to stomach.
Yeah, it's one of those cases that just sticks with you, doesn't it? The more you learn about it.
Absolutely.
It's just the contrast, I think, between that outward persona and the really dark side that was hidden for so long.
Yeah, that contrast is really what makes this case so fascinating and
Yeah.
so disturbing at the same time.
Absolutely.
I mean, you look at this guy and on paper, he seems like he has it all together.
Yeah.
135 IQ, studied art at UCLA,
Mm.
even worked at the LA Times for a little bit.
You'd never suspect.
You would never suspect.
Right, and that's exactly what makes this case a chilling example of what we call the evil genius trope in true crime, you know? It's fascinating and disturbing at the same time because it forces us to think about the fact that intelligence and charisma can be, distorted and used for evil.
Oh, absolutely.
And he used it not only to commit crimes but to evade capture.
Yeah.
He exploited loopholes, he was manipulative and really controlled his public image, so it makes him even more dangerous.
Yeah. So how do we even begin with a case like this? Where do we start?
Well, I think, like with a lot of criminals, we see those early signs early on.
Oh, really?
His father abandoned the family when he was young,
Okay.
and there were some red flags even during his time in the military.
Interesting.
In fact, a military psychiatrist actually diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder,
Oh, wow.
which, that's characterized by that disregard for the rights of others and kind of violating those rights.
So that's really interesting. And that makes me think about the nature versus nurture debate.
Oh, absolutely.
How much of someone's path is really determined by their childhood? Or is it just something that they're born with?
It's such a complex question, isn't it? And there are really no easy answers. But
Yeah.
even with those early signs in Alcala's case, it's still so hard to grasp how somebody goes from what seemed like a pretty normal upbringing to these heinous acts.
Yeah. So let's get into some of those acts. Let's get into that timeline of his crimes. And it all starts in 1968 with the case of Tally Shapiro.
Yeah, 8-year-old girl.
Yeah. I mean, that's just horrifying to even think about.
And this is actually where we start to see that brutality that kind of becomes a recurring theme with his crimes.
Okay.
He lured her into his apartment, and really it was only because a passerby saw something off
Wow.
and called the police that she even survived.
Oh, my gosh.
She had been beaten, but thankfully she was still alive.
So it's a miracle that she survived that.
Absolutely. But after the attack, he flees to New York under the alias John Berger,
Okay.
and it's during this time that he commits another really chilling crime, this time taking the life of Cornelia Crilley.
Yeah. 23-year-old flight attendant. And that case went unsolved for decades, right?
It wasn't until much later that DNA evidence linked him to the murder.
Wow.
So, it's a chilling realization that he was likely continuing to offend even while he was on the run.
Yeah, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a pattern.
Exactly.
And the fact that DNA technology wasn't as advanced back then really makes you wonder how many other cases are out there that he could be connected to.
It's really a scary thought.
Yeah, and there's this thought that maybe he could have been stopped earlier because he was caught
Right.
for the attack on Tally Shapiro. But her family decided against having her testify.
Which meant he only got a lesser sentence.
Right.
Can you imagine being in that position?
It would be such a tough decision as a parent.
An impossible decision.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he served just 2 years for what he did to Tolly, and just 2 months after his release, he was arrested again, this time for assaulting another young girl.
Oh, my gosh.
It makes you think, could these tragedies have been prevented if he had faced harsher consequences earlier on?
Yeah. That's a really, really tough question to think about.
It is.
That was one we have to ask, right?
Absolutely.
It seems like there were so many missed opportunities.
And sadly, his reign of terror continued in 1977. Ellen Jane Hover disappeared from her New York apartment.
And she was the goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., right?
That's right. And her remains were found about a year later near the Hudson River.
It's just horrifying to think about.
It really is. And, the fact that he was able to move in those circles appear so normal, so charming, all while committing these horrific acts.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
It's unfathomable.
It really shows that stark contrast between the outward persona and the the darkness that he hid and the fact that he was able to compartmentalize these different parts of his life to such a disturbing degree,
Yeah.
it's just incredible.
It really is. It's kind of hard to believe that while all of this was going on, he actually appeared on the dating game.
Yeah, no, it's just, it blows your mind, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like this guy, suspected of multiple murders, managed to get himself on a nationally televised dating show.
Yeah, he was introduced as a successful photographer
Right.
who enjoyed skydiving and motorcycling.
Wait, it's like he was living this totally double life.
Yeah. I mean, talk about a master manipulator.
Yeah.
And he actually won the date.
I know.
But Cheryl Bradshaw, the Bachelorette, she declined to go out with him because she said he was creepy.
Good for her.
Yeah, it's a pretty chilling thought to think about what might have happened if she had gone on that date.
It really is, and it just underscores how important it is to trust your gut.
Right.
Sometimes that little voice in your head is all we have to protect us from danger.
Yeah, so getting back to this compartmentalization thing, I mean, it's a truly disturbing psychological phenomenon.
It is.
How can someone be so good at presenting this facade of normalcy while secretly engaging in these horrific acts of violence?
Right. And that's what makes this case so fascinating, I think, is that we're trying to understand the mind of someone who seems to just defy all logic and reason.
Exactly. And then there's the photographs, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, after his arrest, they found hundreds of photographs of women and children.
Many of them pose suggestively or even semi-nude.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of those photos that were released to the public, and it's just such an unsettling collection. I mean, what do experts make of these photos?
Well, they could be a lot more than just trophies,
Okay.
Some experts think that they could actually hold clues to identifying more victims.
Oh, wow.
In fact, one of the photos was later linked to a murder victim, Christine Thornton, who had disappeared in 1977.
Wow. And it took decades for her remains to even be identified.
I know, it's amazing.
It really is. And it gives you this sense of hope, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, even with these cold cases, there's still a chance to find answers.
Exactly. And, in 2010, law enforcement decided to release some of those pictures to the public in the hopes that maybe somebody out there would recognize somebody.
Yeah.
And come forward with information. It was a long shot.
Yeah.
But it was worth a try.
Yeah.
And sadly, a lot of those faces in those photographs are still unidentified to this day.
So it's unsettling to think that there could be so many more victims out there that we don't even know about.
Absolutely. And, it kind of shifts gears a little bit, but let's talk about the legal proceedings because this was complicated too.
Oh, yeah?
There were multiple trials, convictions, and appeals. I mean, he was like a legal Houdini for years, slipping through the cracks of the justice system.
I can't even imagine what the families of the victims were going through having to relive all of this over and over again.
It's just an incredibly drawn out and painful process for them.
Yeah.
Trying to balance the need for a fair trial with the desire to see justice served.
Right.
And in one of his trials, he actually chose to represent himself.
Wait, he represented himself?
Yes, as his own lawyer.
In a murder trial?
Yes, he questioned witnesses, he presented evidence.
Wow.
He even questioned himself on the stand.
That's incredible. Why would he do that?
Some people think it was just another way for him to kind of exert control over the narrative. He was a manipulator and he had this belief in his own intelligence that he could outsmart everybody.
Wow.
And he just seemed to kind of relish the attention that this gave him.
Wow.
But, all of his legal maneuvering, it wasn't enough to avoid justice completely.
Okay.
And eventually he was found guilty of 5 murders in California and sentenced to death.
So at least there was some accountability for his crimes.
There was, and he also ended up pleading guilty to 2 murders in New York.
Okay.
Which brought some closure to those cases.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the story ends there. There's still that lingering question of just how many more victims might be out there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we have these unidentified photos. We have these unsolved cases in different states where he lived or traveled.
Right. And for the families of these missing people, I mean, that lack of closure has got to be just agonizing.
Oh, absolutely.
Just that not knowing, and the possibility that they may never have those answers.
Yeah. And it's like this horrifying puzzle, right? With these missing pieces.
It is.
And we hear about Pamela Lamson in Marin County and then the Seattle cases. And then there's even a woman who came forward after Alcala's death.
Right.
Claiming that he attacked her back in 1968. I mean, each of these stories represents a potential life that was cut short, a family that's left wondering what happened to their loved one.
And the psychological toll that that takes on these families. I mean,
Yeah.
the nightmares, the wonder, just never having that peace.
It's hard to even imagine.
And the fact that he died without revealing any more information,
Right.
it just adds another layer of tragedy to this whole story.
It's almost too much to process,
Yeah.
the sheer scope of his crimes, the pain that he inflicted.
It's a stark reminder that, evil exists in this world and that seemingly ordinary people can be capable of just horrific things.
It's really easy to get overwhelmed by cases like this. But I think it's also important to remember that we can learn from them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this whole deep dive into Rodney Alcala, it's a reminder to be vigilant, to trust our gut, and really just to look out for each other.
Yeah, if something feels wrong, it probably is.
Exactly.
And as we wrap up here, I think it's important to really emphasize just how calculated and manipulative Alcala was.
Right.
This wasn't just a random string of crimes. This is a pattern of predatory behavior.
Exactly. And him being on the dating game.
Right.
It's just that juxtaposition of that with the horrific reality of what he was doing.
It's terrifying.
Really highlights how easily evil can hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
We often think of monsters as these easily identifiable figures, but the truth is they can be anyone.
And those photographs, hundreds of photographs, they just serve as this chilling reminder that there are probably many more victims out there
Absolutely.
whose stories haven't been told.
And it's a sobering thought, but it's important to remember that, even in the face of this kind of darkness, the pursuit of justice continues.
Yeah.
Law enforcement is still working to try to identify those people in those photographs. And, there are organizations dedicated to supporting the families of missing persons. So there's always hope.
Absolutely. And to our listener, we hope that this deep dive into the world of Rodney Alcala has been insightful and thought-provoking. It's definitely unsettling, but it's a case that forces us to confront this reality of evil, but also reminds us about how important it is to be vigilant and to always keep fighting for justice.